Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Other Dupe Productions Reputation Station Part 3, where I'm continuing my incredible fisking and undermining of Other Dupe's cut and paste comments on gun control. And I don't do generalized videos like he does, so if he does a response, it'll be 2 minutes. Gang violence is influencing a lot of the... Even though violent crime and homicide has dropped substantially in this country over the last 25 years, the areas where it is really bad, it's gangs that are perpetrating a lot of it. And I will say this too, a lot of it has to do with drug trafficking. If we ended the war on drugs, I believe the homicide rate and violent crime rate would go down substantially. So I think that would assist it. But for what it's worth, gangs... If you look at the FBI reports on the National Gang Threat Assessment, you find out that states with a number of gang members, 6 or more per 1,000 people, you can see 2 Democrat dumps are the main ones, Illinois and California, 2 cesspools run by Democrats into the ground, and then surprisingly Idaho, Nevada, and New Mexico are also on the list, but those... Illinois and California are 2 of them that stand out. And, of course, like I said, they're run by Democrats. Nationwide threat of gangs. Of law enforcement officers, 45.3% of them considered neighborhood-based gangs a significant threat in their community. Major cities reporting gang activity in 2010. You've got your usual cesspools like Los Angeles, Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland. Detroit's almost a lost cause at this point. And then apparently Texas is having a huge problem with it. Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, Houston, San Antonio, all their major urban areas are permeated with gangs. So you can see most of the... If you live in a city of over 1 million people in the U.S., it's highly likely that at least some part of that city has a major gang problem. Go to the south side of Chicago. I've been there several times myself just to observe the Cretans, and you'll get an idea of what it is. In 2001, more than half of all homicides in Los Angeles and Chicago were reported to be gang-related in 2001, 59 and 53% respectively. So... You can see how gangs are, even though the homicide and violent crime rate has, as I've said many times, gone down substantially over the last 20-25 years, the areas where it is a problem, a lot of it's perpetrated by gangs. And again, if we stop the war on drugs, I think that would help a lot. And if Other Dupe says, now the number of guns I think would also go down because there's a lot of illegal gun running done, because drug dealers have to protect their turf and their monopoly. So I don't think the number of guns would go down substantially, because I think the average American citizen who isn't a criminal will still buy a gun. But Other Dupe's argument would be further undermined if he believes that the homicide and violent crime rate would go down even more if the war on drugs was ended. So that won't work in his favor. So you can see how gangs are, especially in big cities, huge problems still. Speaking of people who commit gun crimes, some of the morons like Other Dupe, a lot of progressives make it out to be, it's the white tea partier, or it's a guy who, he just snapped. He just went crazy, got mad, and just went off, and he'd be better off if he didn't have a gun. What's the typical, now this isn't always the case, but most of the time it is, these progressives try to paint every murderer as somebody who just snapped. The problem is, though, these progressives say, they argue a gun in the closet to protect against burglars will most likely be used to shoot a spouse in a moment of rage, and most gun-related homicides are a result of impulsive actions taken by individuals who have little or no criminal background, or who are known to the victims, and by law-abiding citizens who might have stayed law-abiding if they had not possessed firearms. So that's the mantra they put out, and this comes from Would Banning Firearms Reduce Murder and Suicide by Don B. Cates and Gary Mauser. And here are some pertinent facts. Though only 15% of Americans over the age of 15 have arrest records, approximately 90% of adult murderers have adult records. Victims as well as offenders, I'm just hitting the high points here, specifically talking about the 1950s and 1960s Philadelphia murders, tended to be people with prior police records, usually for violent crimes such as assault. The great majority of both perpetrators and victims of 1970s Harlem assaults and murders had previous adult arrests, probably over 80% or more. Regardless of their arrests for other crimes, and this is where ending the war on drugs would probably help. This will dovetail with it. Regardless of their arrests for other crimes, 80% of 1997 Atlanta murder arrestees had at least one earlier drug offense, with 70% having 3 or more prior drug offenses. A New York Times study of the 1,662 murders committed in that city in the years 2003, 04, and 05 found that more than 90% of the killers had criminal records. Baltimore police figures show that 92% of murder suspects had prior criminal records in 2006. So it doesn't always go this way, but, and again, ending the war on drugs I think would help a lot. It would help. Homicide rate would go down for all ethnic groups, all backgrounds. But the thing is, people who go crazy with a gun usually have some kind of past criminal record. They beat up their wife, they beat up their girlfriend, breaking and entering, something like that. It wasn't somebody who's squeaky clean that just snapped. That's usually not the case. But the progressives try to make it that way so they can justify infringing on my and your Second Amendment rights. Some pertinent information on background checks. Other dupe whines about this. He'll throw up some cut and paste. We need more. We need universal background checks. More background checks. Under federal law, it is illegal and punishable by up to 10 years in prison for the following people to receive, possess, or transport any firearm or ammunition. Someone convicted or under indictment for a felony punishable by more than 1 year in prison. Someone convicted of a misdemeanor punishable by more than 2 years in prison. A fugitive from justice, an unlawful user of any controlled substance. Ooh. Someone who has been ruled as mentally defective. Well, that might affect a lot of progressives. Or has been committed to any mental institution. An illegal alien. Someone dishonorably discharged from the military. Someone who has renounced his or her U.S. citizenship. Someone subject to certain restraining orders, or someone convicted of domestic violence misdemeanor. It is illegal and punishable by up to 10 years in prison to sell or transfer any firearm or ammunition to someone while knowing or having reasonable cause to believe this person falls into any of the prohibited categories listed above. And they want to, for example, if a friend of mine at work sells me a .22, they want to be able to get in on that because that's They want to do something about that sale. What are you going to do about it? Private sales of handguns. What are you going to do about it, other dupe? It is illegal to engage in the business of importing, manufacturing, and dealing in firearms without a federal license to do so. It is illegal for any federally licensed firearms business to sell or transfer any firearm without first conducting a background check to see if the buyer or recipient falls into any of the prohibited categories listed above. It is illegal for anyone except a federally licensed firearms business to sell, buy, trade, or transfer a firearm across state lines. Under federal law, private individuals, here's where they're going to cry, private individuals are not required to conduct a background check before selling or transferring a firearm to someone who lives in the same state. But it is illegal and punishable by up to 10 years in prison for a private individual to sell or transfer a firearm while knowing or having reasonable cause to believe that the recipient falls into one of the prohibited categories above. And then, of course, California, if you're a private individual, your father selling a gun to your son or a friend, they want to get in on that. They got to do something about it. In the 10-year period from November 30th, 1998 to December 31st, 2008, about 96 million background checks for gun purchases were processed through the federal background check system. Of these, approximately 681,000, or about 1%, were denied. During 2002 and 2003, out of 17 million background checks resulting in 120,000 denials, the federal government prosecuted a whole 154 people, about 1/10 of 1% of the denials. According to federal agents interviewed in a 2004 U.S. Justice Department investigation, the vast majority of denials under the federal background check system are issued to people who are not a danger to the public because the prohibiting factors are often minor or based on incidents that occurred many years in the past. As examples of such, agents stated that denials have been issued due to a 1941 felony conviction for stealing a pig and a 1969 felony conviction for stealing hubcaps. The same investigation audited 200 background check denials, found that 8% of denied applicants were not prohibited from lawfully possessing a firearm. During 2008, applicants appealed about 19% of the 70,725 background check denials issued that year. Of these, about 23% were later overturned and the applications approved. Between February 2004 and February 2010, 1,225 firearm and 3 explosives background checks for people on terrorist watch list were processed through the federal background check system. Of these, 91% of the firearm transactions and 100% of the explosives transactions were allowed. That's a GAO report. So other dupe, listen, little fella, little guy. You listening to me, little man? We don't need more background checks. The government needs to execute current law better. Are you listening, dummy? So he doesn't know any of that, of course, because he's an idiot, and Wikipedia didn't tell him. So Washington's they're overseeing this background check system to make sure crazy Democrats don't get guns. And the Government Accountability Office proved that they don't do a very good job of it. So execute existing law. So they're using their own stupidity and the failures of Washington for more intrusive laws. Go figure. Quickly, we'll go over the last 2 pieces of business really quick here. One of Other Dupe's favorite talking points, as you saw in the beginning of part 1, is in homes with guns, the homicide of a household member is almost 3 times more likely to occur in homes without guns. And JustFacts.com, and of course they have all their links up there, so you can check all these out. And I went and checked to make sure all these were still active. Reasons for elimination. This statistic is based on a 3-county study comparing households in which a homicide occurred to demographically similar households in which a homicide did not occur. The study blurs cause and effect. Ownership of a gun is not a random decision. Homicide victims may possess firearms precisely because they are likely to be victimized. And this goes back to a lot of people who do go on these killing sprees and end up committing murder with a gun had previous criminal records, and that's why some of them may get a gun. Doesn't mean, some people do own guns because they are likely to be engaging in illegal activity. Minor variations in firearm ownership rates, which are determined by interview and are thus dependent on interviewees' honesty, can then negate the results. And all these studies, Other Dupe sites, they're very small studies, small sample sizes. The results are arrived at by subjecting the raw data to statistical analyses instead of letting the data speak for itself. And here's some interesting points. The raw data of this study shows that households in which a homicide occurred had a firearm ownership rate of 45% as compared to 36% for non-homicide households. Again, I have all the links underneath the video. You can check all these out. Households in which a homicide occurred were twice as likely to have a household member who was previously arrested, 53 versus 23%. 5 times more likely to have a household member who used illicit drugs, again in the war on drugs, but you need to mention it for this. And 5 times more likely to have a household member who was previously hit or hurt during a fight in the home. So a lot of these studies, they don't really cut the mustard, but Other Dupe will parrot them uncritically, and he will do it over and over, and he'll pound the table, and he uses a lot of these progressives on YouTube. They use their abundance of free time to kind of scare people off. He's going to be on all the time, so they use this free time. And quickly, as far as defensive gun use, I need to mention this real quickly. They will use, for example, Other Dupe will probably use the National Crime Victimization Survey to say that there aren't a lot of defensive gun uses. And if you check under the links there, underneath the video, I have a link for defensive gun uses where Cato's got an interactive map that you could look at and see where people have, well, women have fended off a potential rapist with a gun, a guy delivering pizza, he was going to be robbed, he brandished a gun and the guy ran off. You can see a lot of these defensive gun uses. However, the Bureau of Justice Statistics, guns basically, defensive gun uses, they run them at about 60 to 100,000 per year, but Florida State's award-winning criminologist Gary Kleck says it's about 2.5 million. They will say, and the Cato author mentioned this, I forget who it was that authored this, but they'll say he's NRA funded. He is not. They'll regurgitate stuff from the Violence Policy Center and Mother Jones. And 6 reasons to distrust the defensive gun use data from the government. The survey is not anonymous. Once you find out, the respondents were told from the outset that the survey is conducted by the government, specifically the U.S. Census Bureau. So, in essence, those who unquestionably trust the NCVS data on defensive gun uses believe that the question, "Hi, I'm from the government. Please give me your name and address and tell me if you've used a gun to protect yourself in the last year," will yield accurate results. So, the Department of Justice, U.S. Census Bureau, you can see how these people who respond to these surveys, they might not be totally honest because they're afraid, maybe they do own a gun illegally, and maybe they lived in Chicago before the handgun ban got overturned there, and they were worried about the Department of Justice coming after them. Maybe Hussein coming after them for wanting to defend themselves from criminals. So there are there's well over 100,000. Gary Kleck puts it in the millions of defensive gun uses every year. So that's part of the reason I firmly believe that the violent crime and homicide rate has gone down, is because there are more guns out there. And certainly people will continue, and they always will abuse their right to use a gun, and some people have that right taken away. I think I've done a fine job of undermining in great detail all of the other dupes' quick talking points on guns. So pass this around. I split it into 3 parts. So it'd be easier to follow, so it wouldn't be too long. Other dupe, your gun control nonsense has been debunked. More videos to come in the future. Have a nice day.